So I've wanted to make a video for a long time that helps beginners in woodland photography get better compositions, understand light, what light to take it in, the camera equipment, etc. And ideally get from taking photos like this to taking photos like this.
A big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video.
Morning everybody, fantastic to see you all again. So following on from last week's video where I took some pretty cool woodland photos, I was quite pleased with them. I think they turned out really well. I had amazing conditions obviously, which is a really key thing I'll get onto later about woodland photography. I've got some photos in front of me on my computer here. I'm going to talk through some of those photos, give some examples. But the main thing is that I just want to give you quick tips if you've not taken a lot of woodland shots before, or maybe you're not happy with your woodland photography. I think the things I'm going to say are really easy to fix and will hopefully take your woodland photography to the next level, because I love taking photos of trees. So there's lots of common mistakes. One major one, which I'll talk about at the end of the video, so stick around for that. And we're coming into autumn, which is such an amazing time of year. So I think now's a good time for a video like this to go out, because it's a good time to go and scout woodland areas and try and find somewhere where you can hopefully get the perfect conditions and get a great shot. Right, the first section is compositions. The most important thing in any photo really is the composition, how you arrange all the elements. So a lot of photos that I used to take with my woodland shots were a little bit like this, where they had no background, which is the first tip in composition. Thinking about the background is as important as actually the trees themselves. So when you're taking trees, the sort of number one thing that I would say is try and exclude the sky. Now, not every photo you ever take is going to exclude the sky, but certainly if you've got a shot like this, where we've got a photo here of some nice trees in some mountainous area, then the sky's just a distraction. As soon as you zoom in a little bit and compose it like this, then you're focusing on the trees, not so much the sky. And most of the time, like that shot I just showed, and the one previous to that, the sky is a distraction. So if it's really foggy, that can really help, and that can get rid of the sort of hard border between the tree edges and the sky, which is the big distraction, like this shot from Madeira. But there's lots of other photos that I've taken where, in fact, most of my woodland photos don't have a sky in it, like all these here. Okay, the next thing is a main character in a photo. You know, we always want something a bit like these or these trees here, where you know, you have sort of a main tree, a main focus of the photo, and I think that's really important. I think having a main character is important. You don't want a shot like this where there's lots of trees and nothing's the main character. That can work, but it's a lot more difficult to get, and it usually works when there's lots of, you know, really common trees. The famous one is Ansel Adams' aspen trees, which worked really well, and I don't think that had a main character. But by and large, I think having a main character or a main set of characters in the photo can really help your woodland photos. So this is a good example here where I've got actually two main characters. The one that's sort of arching over the other also has depth, which I'll get onto in a minute. This one's a main character. This was, to me, this tree felt like a ballerina. I've talked about this tree so many times before, but having a main character here. And then these next two examples are where I feel like the characters are interacting a little bit. The first one I've called The Embrace, because it feels like they're embracing. And I feel like you can see the character of trees more in the winter. And I'm going to get onto different seasons and how I photograph different seasons later on in the video. But I think in the winter you can really see the characters in these trees, and it just look really amazing. Okay, the next thing in composition is depth. You know, that's what fog does. You know, again, if you just look at one of these photos here, you can see that the fog adds depth to it. You know, we've got this tree here, and then the depth of the image going into the background here, and that's created by the luminosity values that the fog provides to the image. So we've got darker values here and a lot lighter values in the background because the fog is attenuating the light a little bit. But you don't have to use fog. I mean, certainly fog helps, like this shot here. because I think without fog in this shot, these trees would all merge into one and you wouldn't have that depth. But you can use other things. So when it was snowing, when I was in Scotland recently, then I used the line of the snow and used the contrast of the snow against the water to create depth. So your eye sort of leads through the image with this diagonal line. So any diagonal lines, you can find paths in bluebells or in wild garlic in spring can look really, really good. Or like that shot I just showed before, just having depth that's shown by the size of the trees. You know that tree down in the valley there is probably not as big as the front tree, but it's still a lot bigger than just a little miniature tree. So you know it's a lot further away, so that's providing depth to the image. Also in autumn, I find that the colours can provide depth because it's giving you some sort of contrast. When you have all green in the summer, it all sort of sticks together and doesn't provide the depth as much. And I'll show some examples here where it just doesn't work. Everything just sticks together. So I've got an ebook on Woodland Photography. I'll put a link in the description. I've recently put that on my website in pounds because it used to be sold in dollars on a different site. So I've recently put that on Squarespace. You can now get that. It's £25, the same as my other composition book. And there's also an offer for buying both together. I'll put all the links in the description below. So yeah, that ebook is on my website. I did that with Squarespace. They're a fantastic platform for setting up your own website, whether that be to do a blog or to put on your own products for sale. Maybe you want to set up a calendar for sale for Christmas. It's a fantastic platform to do that. It's really easy, you don't need any technical skills. There's a link in the description below. It's squarespace.com/Nigel. You get 10% off if you use offer code Nigel or go to /Nigel. Really helps out my channel as well. So take a look at it. And also if you want to have a look at that ebook as well on Woodland Photography, it goes into a lot of depth. There's lots of examples. There's a link there in the description below. Right, back to weather and light, because that is something that people ask all the time. Oh, well, we don't get fog where we are. Fog is great. I'm not going to deny. I get so excited when it's foggy.
This is just incredible. We both don't really know where to go.
And you can get fantastic images like this one here and like the ones you saw in last week's video. It helps separating and providing depth, as I just talked about. It also helps, blending in the sky. So if you've got a little bit of sky and you've got fog, it sort of blends all together so you don't have to worry too much about the sky. And also it just helps separation of elements as well within the scene. But you don't need fog. There's lots of other elements. In fact, every type of weather can lead to a good woodland photo. There's some that are better than others though. So let me explain. Rain is something that I love shooting in when it comes to woodland photography. You can just take your camera, put on a hood onto your camera so you don't get any water on your lens. Most cameras are waterproof and you can just go out and shoot in the rain. The reason rain's good, especially in autumn, so especially around this time of year, the next few months, is it saturates the leaves and it provides this really saturated colour. Even more so if you use a polarizer, and I'm going to talk a bit more about equipment, but if you polarize the light, those reflections that you get when the leaves are wet are reduced, and you get that really vivid colour of the leaves. I used a polarizer actually, even when I was shooting this shot here, just to create a little bit more colour in these leaves here, because everything was really damp from the fog. But when it's raining, when it's just been raining, you can get a lot of atmosphere, and that's fantastic. The other thing is low sun. So I don't so much like midday sun, but even that you can get good shots, but I don't often go and do woodland photography in midday sun. But low sun's good. You can get shots in if you have like a very uniform trees, like beech trees down south, in the UK is really good. And you get like the light coming through or the shadows casting really nice light lines coming through. So this one I've shot in the bluebells here when I was down in Dorset. The sun was just off to the right hand side and you can see that light's just casting these really nice even lines coming through. As soon as the light goes a little bit higher, then you get annoying shadows on the branches which you want to try and avoid. But that low light, when you shoot into the light or just off to the side, the light's just off to the side, can produce some really nice shots. Overcast weather can produce really good shots because you don't have any distracting light. but like this shot here. But when you're doing overcast shots, I would say try and have something that's quite dominant in the image. So in this one, I've got this wall, and then these silver birches help. Silver birches always look good in autumn, I find, in any type of weather, but especially overcast weather. But this wall helps to just create a little bit more structure to the image. And again, this helps to create depth because it's leading your eye through the image. The worst things I'd say are full sun, because you get shots like this where you just have a lot of, it's already complicated, a woodland. You don't want to make it more complicated. And by having sun in there and shadows, then it adds a lot of complication to it. So I would avoid that a little bit. But you can get good shots. So this is not midday sun, but the sun's probably, I don't know, this is maybe 10 a.m. or something. I'm shooting directly into the sun. And I'm using the sun as part of the composition by creating a sunburst there. To do that, you want to shoot at around sort of f14 to f20, and you'll get that starburst. And the top tip on that is just wait for the sun just to come past a branch or past the trunk. Just when it's peeping out, then you can shoot at f14 to f20, and you get this really nice starburst. And you can utilize the sun in your composition. Windy isn't often great with woodland photography, but even when it's windy, you can use the wind to your advantage. So just try a long exposure. It was windy when I was in Wales once on a trip, and the wind was blowing the leaves. So I just had a little bit longer exposure, maybe a 2-second exposure, and that just created this sort of fluffiness to it. And I quite like this. I think it's just a little bit more atmospheric, and it tells a story, which is what you're trying to do with the photo. Okay, on to the next thing, and that's equipment. So what equipment do you need? Well, you can have anything. You can have an APS-C camera like this, Z50 here. This has got like a kit lens on, like a 15 to 50, which is equivalent to a 24 to 70 lens, or my Z8 with my 24 to 120. In terms of a lens, so it doesn't matter what camera you have, it just doesn't matter. In terms of a lens, I tend to like my 24 to 120 because I feel that's a good range. Probably somewhere between 35 to 100 millimeters is what I'm usually shooting at in woodland photography. Obviously, the longer you go, the more tricky it is to get everything in focus. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about settings in a second. So that's where a DX camera, a sort of APS-C camera helps, because you get more in focus at the same field of view. The other thing I'd suggest is a polarizer. I don't think you need any other filters apart from a polarizer for woodland photography. As I said before, when you polarize wet leaves, they become saturated. I don't use a polarizer a lot, but maybe 10% of my photos I polarize, but I always try the shot with and without a polarizer when the leaves are wet. When they're not wet, I just don't bother. A tripod is essential for woodland photography. One, I feel like you really need to be purposeful with woodland photography, where you're really thinking about a composition, because you want to be careful with the branches and how they might overlap. So you don't want, so for instance in this shot here, I don't want these branches to overlap these trees in the background. So I was just moving it a little bit, and I feel like when you're on a tripod, you can really get it in place, and then you can think, right, I'm just going to move it a tiny bit that way, I'm going to move it a tiny bit up or down, and that's helpful. But more important than anything, quite often you're shooting at 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds, because as I get onto the settings now, you want to shoot at ISO 64 or 100, the base ISO in your camera, because you want the most dynamic range, you want the highest quality image you can get. And in woodland photography, there's no excuse not to do that, really. So having a tripod's good. And then what I'd recommend is you shoot at the lowest ISO, so the base ISO of your camera, that'll be ISO 100 or probably 64 with a Nikon. And then you want to have an aperture probably around about f8 to f13, depending on what you want to get in focus. Usually what I do, so for instance, again, I'll go back to these two shots here because I think they're really good examples. But on this one, I'd always focus on the hero trees. So I'd focus here. This was probably shot at about f10, I should think. And just make sure the focus drops far enough to get this in focus. But this here isn't in focus, and I'm not bothered about that. And the background, I want to get it in focus, but if it was just slightly, especially in a foggy shot, just dropping off focus, again, I'm not too bothered about that. It's this that I want to get in focus. So you just need to go somewhere between f8 and f13. And if you're in doubt, just shoot f13. And that's it really for settings. Then it's just focusing, I use point focus on that tree, and then the shutter speed takes care of itself, just making sure your histogram is pushed to the right as much as it can without blowing out any highlights. Time of year. So there's lots of different times of year you can shoot. The 4 seasons are what I'm going to talk about, and we'll start with winter. So winter is where, as I said right at the beginning, the character of the trees come out. As you can see in this shot here, the tree, it's this big old oak, and it just looks so characterful. And I've called this Grandad because I just feel like this old tree, you've got a broken branch down as well. It's been there for years and years, hundreds of years, and that character comes out in it. So I feel like winter's a great time to see the character and the structure of the trees, like that ballerina shot that I showed earlier. Or you can get closer as well. So if it's snowy, you can punch in on the trees and get details of woodlands, which I think look really good. It doesn't have to be snowy, but if it is snowy, what it does is it provides depth, because it almost creates like a 3D quality to the trunks and the branches. And I then probably put like a 70 to 200 lens on or something and just try and punch in on the trees. But winter's great. You can get a lot of winter scenes like these that are all about contrast, I'd say. So the blacks and whites and the structure and the detail within the trees. When you get into spring, it's not so much about the contrast, but it's more about the colour tonality and the lushness of the woodland that you're trying to get across. In spring, you've obviously got the flowers, so you've got the wild garlic and the bluebells, which look fantastic. Bluebells, I've always struggled with bluebells, I have to be honest. I still don't think I've quite got a bluebell shot that I'm super happy with. We don't get really amazing bluebell woods up here, but when I'm struggling, I go in a little bit tighter and shoot like this fern in the bluebells, because I feel like a lot goes on in spring that's just exciting, like the ferns just start to unfurl, or the bluebells and those greens just look so fantastic. So I feel like spring's about the separation of those greens, the flowers that are blooming, and it's a really good to have a woodland that is going to have some of those things in to go and visit. Summer, to be honest, I think I've got some of my best woodland photos in summer, even though I really don't like shooting in summer. But then when I was looking and doing this video, I was looking through and I was thinking, actually, my best photos are from summer. So Enchanted Oaks was taken in summer. My recent trip was in summer. These silver birches, when the greens were just getting quite uniform at the end of spring, start of summer, was taken in summer. And I think you get a lot of fog. The difficulty with summer though is you've got to get up really early. But when you've got those greens that are all the same, you've got to have structure. I come back to this again. You've got to have strong trees in the shot, because otherwise the green just becomes a bit of a mush. It just blends into one really. Autumn's everyone's favourite time, so we're just coming into that now, and what I'd recommend is try and scout as much as you can over the next week or two, so that when the first trees start turning, usually in the UK that's the silver birches, then you know where the silver birches are and you know where to go to get those. I can't say how important it is to scout. And then what you want to do with those colours is, I find that autumn's the best time to shoot when there's no fog. So like this shot here where I've got these 3 oak trees, and I'm just using these 3 trees and the character of these trees, but then really the colour, because there's graduation in colour from the oranges at the bottom to the yellows at the top, whereas this in the summer would look a little bit all green, and in the winter would probably be a bit bland. Autumn, I've got this graduation of tonality going through the scene, which looks really good. I also like on the silver birch when you get this almost like golden medallions, leaves just everywhere, like this shot here. And then right at the end of autumn, maybe in early November, then you get the ferns that have changed golden and gone golden, and you can get a shot like this, which looks completely different than this shot looked in the summer. Okay, so where do you go to find good woodlands? Well, obviously, I don't know where everybody lives, but there are places all over the world. I'm lucky in the UK, I think it is a pretty good place for woodland photography, but I've seen amazing woodland photography from everywhere. So you might have a park if you live in a city that you can go down to. I've definitely taken good shots in Central Park in New York, but there's lots and lots of different parks that will have trees in, and there'll be rain coming down if there's not fog in those parks, and you can go and find some good trees. You don't have to have the most amazing sprawling forest. What I'd recommend is get a map that hopefully shows the types of trees. In the UK, we have Ordnance Survey maps, and if you look, then you have oak trees and you have like pine trees. The oak trees means that that's an area of deciduous trees, and they tend to be really good in the autumn. And pine trees tend to be very uniform, and if you want something where you're shooting into the sun, where a low sun, then pine trees are probably good for that. So you can look at the maps, and then you can go to Street View and then try and go along the road and look what the woodlands look like from the road, and that'll give you a better idea of if it's a good place to go and explore. So I use Street View all the time to do that. Now I have got a course coming out on local photography that I've done with Mas Peter Everson, so I'll tell you more about that in the future, but that's going to be quite exciting. So I just want to reiterate, I've written down here some common mistakes, and these are things that I've talked about already, but I think are worth reiterating. So what I'd say is avoid shadows on the trunk. So avoid shooting with the sun behind you. That's usually a no-no. It gets distracting and you don't want that. Have a point of focus, whether that's a leading line, it might be like a path or something, or some really hero trees, then make sure there's a point of focus. Don't have distracting sky in your woodland shots. That's the thing that I see most often. You don't want that. Make sure your trees don't cross over or don't get really, really close that they're touching, even though they're behind each other. You want to create as much separation as you can within your woodland photos, and that's just a little bit of trying different compositions. And that's it, really. That should be enough to get you started in woodland photography. It isn't easy, you've just got to go out and try and fail loads. I'd love to see your photos though, so make sure you post them on Instagram with this hashtag, and I'll go and have a look at them, and I'll comment on a few of them of what I think could be improved or not improved. So on Instagram, tag me and also use this hashtag. Thanks ever so much for watching, and until a couple of Sundays time, bye.